So we have this Revolver news story, and it says, exclusive study, COVID-19 lockdowns over 10 times more deadly than the pandemic itself. It says a groundbreaking new study commissioned by Revolver News and concludes that COVID-19 lockdowns are 10 times more deadly than the actual COVID-19 virus in terms of years of life lost by American citizens. Up until this point, there had been no simple, rigorous analysis that accurately and definitely conveyed the true costs of the COVID-19 lockdowns. Accordingly, Revolver News set out to commission a new study to do precisely just that, to finally quantify the net damage of the lockdown in terms of metric known as life years. Simply put, we have drawn upon existing economic studies on the health effects of unemployment to calculate an estimate of how many years of life will have been lost due to the lockdowns in the United States, and have weighed this against an estimate of how many years of life will have been saved by the lockdown. So remember the meta-analysis that I talked about months ago? Now, I have to admit, most of you already know that I was a believer for a quick time period in the whole effects of the coronavirus. And this, I was like radicalized by watching the initial studies that came out. So I was like, holy fucking shit. And then it just sort of like all doubled down. People doubled down on this. We saw all of the Jim Medicare videos and Sticks, Hex and Hammer videos and things like this, talking about the coronavirus, and my videos, right? And so I was all in. I was prepared. Well, I was well prepared before any of this happened, in terms of like food supply and water and things like this. Didn't stock up on toilet paper. Not sure why many people stocked up on toilet paper. Toilet paper. That wouldn't be like at the top of my list. But then that quickly went away as more of the science came out, as more of the data came out, and I changed my mind. I changed my opinion. Isn't this what you're supposed to do? Isn't this what you're supposed to do when presented with new information? I do this all the time. I change my mind on things all the time when presented with new information. And so for the past few months, I've been talking about this meta-analysis, really, because there are two, that showed that for every 1% of unemployment, 5,300 to 10,000 people can die. And I was talking about, all of the other effects that you add on top of this that lead to mortality because of the shutdown. Not because of the virus, but because of the shutdown. So we talked about people losing their health care because they're out of a job. We talked about people, not getting their preventative care, like mammograms, endoscopies, colonoscopies, cancer screening, things like this, because of that loss of health care, meaning they will die from cancer later on. We talked about deaths of despair, drug overdoses, suicides, things like this. A couple of weeks ago, we talked about the CDC's director, Robert Redfield, who came out and said just in suicides alone, it's outweighing COVID deaths. And so now with this study put together, it shows that the results are nothing short of staggering and suggests that the lockdowns will end up costing Americans over 10 times as many years of life as they will save from the virus itself. It goes on. It says President Trump opposes further devastating lockdowns. In his recent Republican National Convention speech, President Trump raised the point that lockdowns have had a very real and very devastating effect on the lives of Americans. But I've been saying this well before anyone's been basically saying this. If you've watched this show, you can attest to that. President Trump, he says the cost of the Biden shutdown would be measured in increased drug overdoses, depression, alcohol addiction, suicides, heart attacks, economic devastation, job loss, and much more. Joe Biden's plan is not a solution to the virus, but rather it's a surrender to the virus. Democratic presidential candidate Joe Biden, by contrast, has suggested that he is willing to impose further lockdowns if scientists tell him to do so. It is unclear which scientists Joe Biden would be listening to, as there is no consensus. There is absolutely no consensus. In fact, I would argue that scientists and economists, that there are more in quantity of them who are opposed to lockdown measures than the reverse of this. There is no consensus among scientists and experts as to whether or not the lockdowns are worth the staggering cost they impose on the common man. So we're not just talking about economics here. Economics this is something that Darren Beatty pointed out in his interview with Michelle Malkin. Economics is upstream from mortality, right? So if he talked about this in terms of, he made a really good analogy. He talked about the cost of a plane ticket, right? He said that the regulations in the airlines will increase the cost of a plane ticket for the common person. And they say that these regulations save lives, but what he was asking was, how many lives does it cost later downstream? Because then people will take other means of transportation that are statistically more dangerous, and how many lives would be lost because of that alternative means of transportation, which you are more likely to get into a car crash. You're more likely to you kill yourself in these alternative means of transportation. So it's not just about economics; it's also about mortality, and economics is tied to mortality, and this is something I've been saying for the past few months or so. We're only going to go through a few parts of this because the article is long, so we're just going to go through one last section, and we're going to get to the graphs and sort of explain the graphs to you. But they're talking about what Joe Biden said. And we have this video here. This is Joe Biden talking about the shutdown.
And in order sworn in come January, and we have coronavirus and the flu combining, which many scientists have said is a real possibility. Would you be prepared to shut this country down again?
I would be prepared to do whatever it takes to save lives, because we cannot get the country moving until we control the virus. That is the fundamental flaw of this administration's thinking to begin with. In order to keep the country running and moving and the economy growing and people employed, you have to fix the virus. You have to deal with the virus.
So if the scientists say, shut it down?
I would shut it down. I would listen to the scientists.
Once again, not very clear which scientist Joe Biden is talking about because there is no consensus. Due to the unfortunate politicized nature of the COVID-19 lockdowns and the associated plausibility of professional repercussions, the authors have chosen for the time being to represent themselves pseudo-anonymously. So you have to understand this. These scientists have to create pen names, essentially, in order to not expose their academic background and their real name and their real identity, to not get doxxed by the mainstream media in fear of loss of job, loss of financial well-being. What does that tell you about academia? Does that tell you that academia is all about dissent and welcomes dissent, as some people suggest? No, it tells you the opposite of that is true. George Borjas is a perfect example. We talk about his findings, right, in terms of the impact that immigration has on wages of American citizens. He talked about this in his book called We Wanted Workers, and he talked about how he was under immense pressure by other people in the academic community to tone down his study, to tone down his findings, to water down his book, to water down his study. And this isn't the only example. We can go to Paul Krugman. Just recently, Paul Krugman, who's like this famous Jewish economist who's been on Masterclass, he's in those Masterclass YouTube ads and all sorts of other things, right? He's appeared everywhere. Paul Krugman got together with a bunch of other economists to push out another economist who is very influential, very prominent, because he went against Black Lives Matter, because he decided to dissent from the message coming from Black Lives Matter. And we see this over and over and over again. Colleges, universities, fire professors, lay off professors, punish professors for going against the narrative that is acceptable and dissenting from the herd. Dissenting from the herd. That's basically what it comes down to. Abel Summer is a PhD candidate. So we have one that's a PhD candidate in social sciences. We have Jeremiah Jackson, pen name, holds a PhD in economics and has experience both in the public sector and a policymaker in the private sector as an analyst. Jacob Cage, these are all fake names, holds a PhD in social sciences field and has extensive experience both in the public and private sectors in policy analysis and strategic communications. Moving on. So here's the U.S. unemployment rate, 2007 to 2020. Remember when we talked about how the U.S. reached the 20% unemployment rate mark, and I said that right there, that's 200,000 deaths alone. That's 200,000 deaths alone just from deaths of despair, just from suicides and drug overdoses alone. That's what I said. So this is a graph here, and it says previous research on job displacement and mortality. So they're talking about that meta-analysis that I've been over with you many times before, has found that displaced workers face a significant increase in mortality rates from which lost years of life can be estimated. Job losses and permanent job separations have been shown to correlate directly with increases in heart disease, drug overdoses, lung cancer, and liver disease, among other factors of increased mortality rate risk. Well, I'm assuming the liver disease, is that correlated to like the alcohol consumption? I'm assuming it is, probably, right? And then, like, look at all, like, the spousal abuse cases. I mean, it's just going to be, there's probably going to be, like, something like 1 million. It's definitely going to be over 1 million. But 1 million to 1.5 million people who die from the effects of the shutdown alone, which is going to be far more than the supposed 200-something thousand people that are dying from the coronavirus. But we know that this is a little bit skewed as well. But they're taking this at face value, right? They're taking the deaths from coronavirus at face value. Just to be fair, right? Just to be generous. It says Sullivan and von Wacher's paper on job displacement and mortality estimated that job separation results in about 1.5 lost life years per individual. Taking the 8.2 million job displacements and multiplying them by Sullivan and von Wacher's lost life year coefficients for each age group provides a total estimate of over 8 million life years lost due to job displacement. Beyond direct job displacements, additional research has shown that labor market recessions have significant but lagged effects on future mortality rates and those entering the labor market. And so we're looking at an estimated 18.7 million life years lost. 18.7 million life years lost. Based on the estimations in Table 4 directly above, the U.S. lockdowns may have saved anywhere between 250,000 and to 750,000 life years. The estimate range is staggeringly low compared to the life years that will be lost as a result of the lockdown. So this follows this, right? So this follows this trend. So they're talking about a trend, and they're following the trend, and they're following the trend to the end. I think they span it a few years or something like this, right? Maybe 10 years. I'm not exactly sure what the span is. I haven't gone through the entire methodology or the study itself. But I'm just focusing on the highlights that when Darren Beattie went over the study and Tucker Carlson went over the study. But basically what they're saying is if you follow this through, you're looking at something that's anywhere between 10 to 20 times more deadly than the coronavirus itself. So basically what's happening here, if you look at this graph, well, let's get to this here. Let's get to this here first. Figure 3 below shows the breakdown with the Swedish and UK models. In the figure, the blue bar represents life years saved from the lockdown, which are estimated by comparing the U.S.'s performance with Sweden and the UK. The red bars represent life years lost from the lockdown, which are estimated using the estimated reductions in life expectancy from unemployment and separations using U.S. data described below. Let me zoom in on this really quickly here for you. This red, this is the UK, this is the Swedish model. This red here is life years lost. This blue is life years saved. So this is what they're talking about here. It goes on, it says, ridiculously, public health experts encouraged Black Lives Matter protests and riots and claimed that they actually reduced COVID-19 infections. This is absolutely true. Do they have a link to this? Yeah, there was an article where it said that the COVID-19 was actually slowing the spread. Or I'm sorry, Black Lives Matter protests were actually slowing the spread of COVID-19. Right? Do I have that here? I think I have that here. Protests slowing spread of COVID. Yeah, here it is right here. Black Lives Matter protests may have slowed overall spread of coronavirus. Slowed the overall spread of coronavirus. You will not find any national mainstream outlets that have printed an article suggesting that the Black Lives Matter protests have caused an increase in the spread of COVID-19. You will not find one. You will not find one. But you will find a bunch of other mainstream outlets who have said that the Black Lives Matter protests have not increased the spread of COVID-19. Not yet. This is what all of the articles basically say. Furthermore, 1,200 health experts signed a letter saying that racism is a bigger threat than coronavirus and that the Black Lives Matter protest should continue. Remember, we saw the doctors, white coats for Black Lives or some bullshit like that, right? The doctors protesting with the Black Lives Matter group versus the doctors out there counter-protesting, the counter-protesters who were against the shutdown, crossing their arms, standing in front of their vehicles. And then what did we see the media say? Well, the media came out and said that one anti-shutdown protest, that one protest in that single city caused a spread, an unimaginable spread of the deadly coronavirus in the United States of America. And we could just go over so many lies that the media has told about this. Let's look at the Chinese virus thing, right? Look at all of the times, we have all the clips, we have all the headlines, all the screenshots, all the times that the Washington Post, the New York Times, CNN, all of the CNN pundits, basically, all of the famous ones, called it the Chinese coronavirus pandemic until Trump called it the Chinese coronavirus. Until he called it the Chinese coronavirus, and then this led to all sorts of anti-Asian attacks in America. Well, guess what? It wasn't until they found out that the perpetrators of these anti-Asian attacks were 90% black. 90% of the anti-Asian attacks that have occurred in America were perpetrated by black people that they fucking shut the fuck up about the anti-Asian attacks in America very quickly now, didn't they? Because it didn't fit their narrative. It's just so tiresome. Let's go to this Fox News article. You guys remember this. CDC's Redfield should sound alarm about suicide amid coronavirus outbreak, critics say. So we went over this, right? And this was CDC Director Robert Redfield, who said that suicides outweigh, right now, just suicides alone outweigh the coronavirus, the deaths from coronavirus. We also have this story here. This is from Summit News. It says, pregnant woman arrested in her home over anti-lockdown Facebook post. You guys probably saw this. You guys probably saw this clip, right? If not, I'll show it to you right now. See if we can get this going here. Let's play this clip right now.
House.
You're the occupier or tenant?
Yeah, I own this house.
There it is. It's a search warrant.
Search warrant for what?
Now, what I will explain to you is if you want to listen, you got your phone going.
Yeah, I do, yeah.
Right. Now, you're under arrest in relation to incitement.
Incitement?
What's that? Now, you're not obliged to say or do anything, but anything you say or do may be given in evidence.
Excuse me, incitement for what? What on earth?
Yeah.
Excuse me, what on earth?
So just put your phone down.
Can you, like,
relation
record
to-
this? I'm in my pyjamas.
What's
I had
this?
an ultrasound in an hour because
Yeah,
I'm
she's
pregnant.
pregnant, so...
I'll take it easy.
What's this about?
But I have an ultrasound
Just let me
in an
finish.
hour.
Let me finish and I'll explain. It's in relation to a Facebook post, in relation to a lockdown protest you put on for Saturday.
Yeah, and I wasn't breaking any laws by doing
You
that.
are actually. You are breaking the law. That's why I'm arresting you in relation to
In
incitement.
front
How
of
can
my
you arrest
children,
her?
In
That's-
front of my 2 children.
Can't you just say to her, take the post down? Like, come
I'm
on.
happy to
Not obliged.
delete the post. This
Should-
is ridiculous.
That's right.
Yeah.
But I have to give you these cautionary rights. You understand?
Yeah, that's
You're
fine.
not-
Like, I'm
not
happy to
obliged
delete
say
the
do
post. This is
anything.
ridiculous. Like,
Anything
this is
you say
in front of
do
my... That's
may be
fine.
given evidence. You understand that?
Yeah, that's fine. But my 2 kids are here. I have an ultrasound in an hour.
Let me
Like, I'm
finish.
happy to
Let me
delete
finish.
the post.
You also have the right to communicate with or to communicate with a legal practitioner. You understand those rights?
Yeah, this is ridiculous.
Yeah, this is a bit unfair. Come on, mate.
No,
What about she just doesn't do the event? Like, it's not like she's done it.
Facebook post. Fuck. It's fucking crazy. The accent's funny, though. The accent's pretty funny. I can't do the Australian accent, but I could probably do... I can do a little bit of the, if you like spell out the UK accent, the accent from the UK, I can kind of do that. It's Tuesday, isn't it? It's Tuesday. All right, let's go on to this. This is, we have to sort of laugh while this is all going on because it's just so depressing. It's so depressing. This is happening right now while this is happening. While, what was that? The study that I brought up from Revolver. While scientists are saying this. So just remember this graph. Screenshot this graph. Share this graph everywhere you go. Everywhere, with everyone you know, share this graph. This is happening while this is happening. School threatens to exclude students who make jokes about coronavirus. So, you know, we're already saying, oi, bruv, it's Tuesday, isn't it? We're already saying, you bloody wanker cunt. We're already saying the what they're doing to people who, you know, go against, like, the Black Lives Matter narrative, the Black Lives Matter, what Black Lives Matter is saying, who go against Black Lives Matter, the new political party in America. We're already seeing what people are doing in terms of this, what teachers are doing, what schools are doing to teachers, to professors, to students. And now with the coronavirus, you're not allowed to criticize the coronavirus if you're a student in the UK. And a school in the UK has vowed to exclude students who make jokes about the coronavirus. So we have two things. We have two things. We have jokes about the Holocaust and jokes about the coronavirus. Three things. Jokes about Black Lives Matter. You can add that in there too, right? Add that in there too. Jokes about George Floyd. Maybe that's another one. Saint Floyd, 94. So remember this story. We went over this story just the other day. I actually have the segment up on BitChute. If you want to go to my BitChute channel and share that video, you guys, I have to ask you. I'm gonna have to do this at the beginning of every BitChute video. Share the videos. Share the videos because you know that my reach has been substantially reduced since I've been terminated from YouTube, since all of my channels have been terminated from YouTube. It's already been substantially reduced even when I was on YouTube because they demonetized me, they pushed me down, they suppressed my reach. So I have to ask you guys to share the videos. Your English accent is priceless. It's terrible. 94% of Americans who died from COVID-19 had contributing conditions. Another way to phrase this is that only 6% of COVID deaths were due to COVID-19 alone. Okay? A lot of the deaths also had other contributing factors. 94% of Americans who died from COVID-19 had other types of health conditions and contributing causes in addition to the virus, according to a new CDC report. Using provisional data on coronavirus-related deaths from the week of ending February 1st through August 22nd, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention concluded last week that for 6% of the deaths, COVID-19 was the only cause mentioned. For deaths with conditions or causes in addition to COVID-19, on average, there were 2.6 additional causes or deaths additional conditions or causes per death, the report said. Respiratory conditions such as influenza, the flu, was included in the COVID-19. This is what I said the other day, or yesterday. Was it yesterday? I think it was yesterday, right? Where we talked about, are all the flu deaths just included in the COVID-19 deaths that are anywhere between 30 to 60,000 a year? 80,000 in 2018, someone said. Are they just all included in the COVID-19 deaths now? Pneumonia, respiratory failure, and respiratory arrest, as well as respiratory arrest. Very interesting. The top symptom for fentanyl overdose is respiratory arrest. And I said this yesterday. I said if there was no if George Floyd didn't get kneeled on by Groyper Derek Chauvin, by Pepe Derek Chauvin, I just think about that meme every time I think about that now. But if George Floyd didn't get kneeled on by this cop, his death would have been ruled, well, either a fentanyl overdose or a COVID-19 death. So post 2020, COVID-19 probably, right? Pre 2020, it would have been ruled a fentanyl overdose. They also talk about like renal failure, Alzheimer's, and cardiac arrest. Heart attacks. We have this quick little segment here from Tucker Carlson. He talked about this new study coming out here, this new study that came out from Revolver News. We're going to play 1 minute and 20 seconds of this. Take a listen.
Well, there's growing evidence that the coronavirus lockdowns haven't simply been ineffective, by definition they have been, but they've also been lethal. We're getting a clearer picture tonight just how much damage our elected officials have done. Not all intentionally, but still. According to a new study by Revolver.News, which effectively is the new Drudge Report, since the actual Drudge Report went completely insane and is unreadable. According to a study they commissioned, the coronavirus lockdowns have been 10 times more deadly than the coronavirus itself in this country. How did they reach that conclusion? Well, Revolver first tallied up the number of deaths caused directly by the coronavirus. Those numbers are public. Then they looked at the number of lockdown-related, stress-related fatalities, such as heart attacks, suicides, drug ODs. Unlike most media organizations, Revolver also took into account the ages of everyone who died. Everyone dies in the end, so your age actually really matters if you're trying to get to the truth of what's happening across a big country like this. Revolver found that the lockdowns have cost roughly 18.7 million combined life years in this country alone. The coronavirus lockdowns, meanwhile, best they could guess, have saved fewer than 1 million life years. Essentially, they're sacrificing the nation's young people. Wonder why young people are so upset. The media's job, of course, isn't to tell you any of this. It's to keep these facts from you, to spread fear, lying if necessary, and to keep the country locked down until Joe Biden wins in November.
And that is what I want to get to right now. When he said, the last thing that Tucker Carlson said was they want to keep the country shut down until the election. A lot of people make jokes, like a lot of my neighbors will make jokes that, you know, this whole shutdown will end as soon as the election comes, right? As soon as the election comes. It's probably true. It's probably true. Because when we look at what they're saying here, we went over this in a segment yesterday, a quick segment. A caller called in and alerted me to a couple of stories that were out there regarding the election. And we went through this very briefly. I want to sort of dig into this here. It says, exclusive, Dem group warns of apparent Trump election day landslide. Election day landslide. And so what they're saying here, just to briefly summarize the story, is that Trump will win in a landslide on election day, and the Democrats admit this, right? This Democratic group, this Democratic data and analytics firm, they admit that Trump will appear to win on election day in a landslide, but then after mail-in votes come in, and after all of that is accounted for, Trump will lose to Joe Biden after all of those mail-in votes are counted. But here's the thing about that, is that when you go to their favorite doctor, Dr. fucking Fauci, he says that there is no reason Americans can't vote in person in November. And basically every other doctor says this. Like, if you can show up to Walmart in a mask to shop for your Folgers coffee or whatever the fuck you buy at Walmart, if you could show up to Walmart in a mask, you can show up to the polls outside on election day in line and vote in the polls. If you could show up indoors with a whole bunch of people walking around in line, 6 feet apart, then you can show up 6 feet apart at the polls on election day. And this is what Dr. Fauci says, and this is what Dr. Birx says, and this is what every scientist says, and this is what every virologist says, and this is what everyone says. There is a consensus on this. So if you want to talk about consensus, there are no doctors out there that say that it's dangerous to show up to the polls in person on election day. There is a consensus. You want to talk about consensus? Here's your fucking consensus right here. And excuse my language. Excuse my language. Sometimes, you know, now that I'm on DLive and not on YouTube anymore, and on BitChute and not on YouTube anymore, sometimes you just have to go off. Sometimes you just have to let it go. I know, not being a good Christian, but there are worse things that I can do. There are worse things that I can do. I think I make up for it in terms of me not drinking alcohol, not smoking pot or doing any drugs, not watching porn, you know, things like this, treating everyone nicely. Let me drop the F-bomb every once in a while here. My goal is to eventually become a powerhouse of truth. That is why it is imperative that you check the links in the description below and go to either Patreon and Subscribestar and support us for at least the cost of a cup of coffee a month. We already have writers writing for theredelephants.com, but we'd like to bring on more in the near future. By the way, at theredelephants.com, you can also find t-shirts, hats, and other products. Check the links in the description below. It helps us out tremendously.